All right. So welcome to today's session. My name is Sue. I'm Climate Change Coordinator with ICLEI Canada. So we have been having lots of new people register for our BNZ Community of Practice. So welcome. Very happy to have some new faces here today. I thought I'd start off just with a quick reminder of what the Building to Net Zero project is all about. So alongside these Community of Practice sessions, where we've been diving into specific topics each month. We've also been working one-on-one with a smaller cohort of 18 municipalities right across the country from Newfoundland to BC. So cohort members have been working with us one-on-one to identify their local building sector goals and create roadmaps and supportive documents to get them towards those goals. Um, so this has included building energy and emissions inventory reports and also fully fleshed out business cases. So as we move forward with all that in the coming months, we'll be excited to share some kind of lessons learned from all that work with you. And also, we're going to be continuing working with these municipalities for implementation support right through till 2027. And one component of that is actually a partnership with our speakers today, who will be helping us to engage and provide education with the local building sector in these municipalities. So, moving on now to today's session for the community of practice. So, we're focusing on what's really a key framework in Canada for building energy performance, and that's Canada's tiered National Building Code. So, we're joined today by two speakers from Natural Resources Canada, Patrick and Alex, who are going to be speaking to help us demystify the tiered code a bit and also explore why it's important for municipalities. So following their presentation, we are going to head into a Q&A. For the Q&A, I'm sure you have questions on this topic and our speakers would love to hear from you. I know, though, not everyone loves to end up on the recording. So if you'd rather not speak up, another option is to put your questions into the chat and then I'll just read them out anonymously. So please feel free to pop questions or comments in there anytime, even if they're not fully fleshed out. Half-baked questions are totally welcome. And just to start off, to get some activity going in there now, I'd invite you to just head into the chat and say hello. If you'd like to write your name, your organization, and location in the chat, and also just feel free, if you have any thoughts or ideas on this topic, please feel free to type that into the chat as well. So following the Q&A, we hope you stick around. To hear from Nathan from here at ICLEI Canada. So Nathan will be providing an overview of Climate Insight, which is a free online platform that consolidates relevant, actionable data and information to build low carbon, resilient housing and infrastructure in Canadian municipalities. So a bit of overlap for sure on our speakers' presentations today. All right, Patrick and Alex, if you'd like to take over, feel free.
Awesome. Thanks, Sue. And I'm just watching the all the different locations that people are dialing into this webinar today. So that's awesome. So my name is Patrick Langevin. I'm with Natural Resources Canada. I'm with the Local Energy Efficiency Partnerships Initiative. And today, Alex and I are going to talk a little bit about the building code, the tiers of the code and how you might be able to leverage those as you look towards energy performance and carbon performance in your jurisdictions. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who's going to introduce himself and then go through the front part of the deck, and then I'll take over and talk a little bit more about some of the resources that we have through LEEP that we can support you with. So Alex, I will advance the slides as you request, and I'll let you take it away.
Hey, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Sue and Nathan, for having us. My name is Alex Beganis. I'm a technical advisor at the Office of Energy Efficiency, more specifically on the Housing Codes and Certification team. And so, in short, we support the code development process, but also the adoption at the provincial and territorial level, and then the implementation of energy codes across Canada. So we're going to start with a bit of an overview on the presentation, just to give you a taste of some of the topics that we'll be tackling. First of all, we'll start with the code context and what are these energy performance tiers? Where did they come from? Um, we're going to touch on BC's Energy Step Code, where we drew a lot of inspiration from. We're going to talk about the National Building Code 2020 and 2025, and perhaps beyond that. We're currently in the 2030 code cycle, so I can share some insights on what's cooking over there. We're going to talk about the EnerGuide rating system and how that can help you basically implement the energy performance tier in your jurisdiction. And then Patrick's going to cover LEEP, some of the code activities that they're doing, code acceleration activities, capacity building, and a lot of engagement. And then finally, the TNZ ICLEI Canada engagement. So moving on to the code context. And so when we talk about the energy performance tiers, it's understood that it's a building code thing, and building codes at a very high level are a form of regulation. Now, regulations usually have a policy driver behind them, and in this case, the policy driver goes back to the Pan-Canadian framework, where we committed to developing net zero energy ready building codes for adoption by 2030. Now, this commitment was reinforced in Canada's building strategy and was endorsed by all levels of government, kind of reinforcing that commitment to net zero energy ready model building codes by 2030. So you'll see there's kind of this step graphic there that basically highlights the I guess the nature of the step code, which is that you progressively increase the stringency as you move your way up the tiers. And the intent there is to enable authorities having jurisdiction to kind of ratchet up their requirements based on their level of readiness. And so I think at the national level, we realize that not everybody's at the same level of readiness, so to speak. And so this is really to enable kind of progressively moving up the tiers.
Estoy en un webinar.
All right. On
Just a
to the next one,
reminder,
please.
folks, to make sure you're on mute.
Next slide, please, Patrick. So the BC Energy Step Code. This is really kind of the first instance of a step code for energy in Canada, and it was developed in 2017. And BC basically realized that they needed new requirements for energy efficient buildings. The province wanted to reduce energy use and GHG emissions from new builds. And they also wanted to send a clear signal to the market with respect to where they were going by 2032 in this case. And so on the right, you'll see that there's step 1 to 5. And those of you who are familiar with the BC Energy Step Code will know that there's a couple compliance metrics. There's the thermal energy demand intensity, and then there's the mechanical energy use intensity. And so these different metrics basically enable you to set the bar where you want. And metrics are really important because how you measure energy performance will basically, I guess, direct the market to finding solutions that comply under that metric. And so we can get into that a little bit when we talk about MBC. But basically, the purpose of this slide is to show that BC came out of the gate in 2017 with the Energy Step Code. They offered 5 different steps and alternative compliance paths, meaning that they had these, we call them TEDI and UE targets for each of the steps, but then they also had a alternative compliance path using the EnerGuide rating system. And now the EnerGuide rating system uses the reference house approach. And so you'll see on the right there, there's basically the equivalent target under the EnerGuide approach. On to the next slide, please. So National Building Code development process. I recognize a few of the names of the attendees here, and so it's nice to see some familiar names who are involved in the process. But at a very, very high level, we develop model codes for provincial and territorial adoption. And so model codes means that it's basically a document that gets published, and then provinces and territories can reference that document within their regulations. A good thing to know is that they're developed on a 5-year cycle. And so there's the 2020 National Building Code, there's the incoming 2025 National Building Code. And as I mentioned, we're currently working on the 2030 and so on and so forth. Now, I do want to mention that there's a new governance model that's based on the Reconciliation Agreement on Construction Codes. And this basically puts the provinces and territories in the driver's seat. At the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to be adopting the building code. And so they should have a say in terms of the policies that the building codes are trying to address. And so in 2020, the policy was the energy performance tiers leading to net zero energy ready levels of performance. Everybody agreed that's what they wanted. Now in 2025, the new policy directive was we wanted to deal with operational emissions. We wanted to deal with overheating. And then in 2030, these other policy priorities continue to evolve and pile on, I guess. We're looking at embodied carbon, for example. We're looking at accessibility and so on and so forth. And so the Reconciliation Agreement on Construction Code is an agreement between the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to reduce or eliminate variations in technical requirements between their building codes. And it also is a commitment to timely adoption. Now that the 2025 is expected to be published at the end of this year, they've committed to adoption within 18 months of that publication date. So that's good to know. And then the last bullet there is basically highlighting that the provinces and territories set the policy direction and create a work plan based on the committees that are available to do code development work. Now, the committees create task groups to address specific tasks, and then those task groups make recommendations in the form of a proposed change to the code. And then that goes back up to the committee, eventually goes out to public review. Once we hear back from public review, there may or may not be further changes. And then it gets recommended back to the codes board for their approval and eventually published. And so it's kind of this cycle in terms of how the information flows. So next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the energy performance tiers. These were part of the 2020 National Building Code, Section 936, and it's basically mirroring the BC Energy Step Code in the sense that there's tiers 1 to 5, 5 being the most stringent and 1 being basically base code. Now, there is a performance compliance path and there is a prescriptive compliance path. Now, under the 2020 National Building Code, the prescriptive compliance path for the energy performance tiers really only got to tier 2, meaning that there were no prescriptive solutions to get to tier 3 and beyond, which was, I think, one of the limiting factors for more aggressive adoption across Canada. Another introduction into the 2020 MBC was a reference to the EnerGuide rating system as an alternative compliance path, which is great for EnerCan and practitioners who want to benefit from the I guess value add of the EnerGuide rating system. And then there's also this introduction of a concept called the peak cooling criteria, because the committees realize that as you have more aggressive energy performance targets, some builders tend to install high gain windows, and with you pile on air tightness, and then you have a occupant comfort issue and a risk of overheating. And so this was really kind of our first stab at trying to mitigate the risk of overheating. On the right, you'll see that there are two performance metrics, or targets rather, to achieve each of the tiers. There's an overall improvement, which is basically the energy consumption of your proposed house in comparison to the energy consumption of the reference house. And then the envelope improvement was really intended to promote kind of an envelope first approach, which is like sound building science principle stuff, just so to kind of mitigate the risk of somebody installing like a high performing mechanical system and then doing nothing on the envelope. So there's kind of this kind of two-step process to compliance to the different tiers. And then you'll see I've put a couple logos there because those targets were not picked randomly. They were picked to kind of align with some of the voluntary programs that were out there. Now, the alignment is not perfect because people measure energy performance in different ways. And so it's kind of hard to say that, tier 5 is exactly net zero energy ready because in the context of the building code, they're silent on renewables. And so you can't account for any renewable generation. And so I guess that's just one of the points that I wanted to make is that the way you measure energy performance really, really matters. Now, in terms of the 2025, which again is expected to be published later this year, we've added GHG performance levels. And so these are similar to the energy performance tiers in that there's going to be levels A to F, and you basically can move your way up based on a percentage improvement over the reference house. We've also introduced an energy intensity-based compliance path. Now, this is an alternative compliance path for the energy performance tiers that uses a energy use metric to measure performance improvement. And the long and short of that one is that it really provides some affordability gains for certain housing types because we found that you can reach the target easier, for example, if you're building highly attached smaller dwelling. And so this was kind of coming down from a policy direction that we need to keep affordability in mind as we make the code more stringent. The other things is that the points-based compliance path, this is a prescriptive compliance path where you basically pick your energy conservation measures and you sum the points, and then you can now comply to tiers 1 to 5. So that was complete. There's a prescriptive package, which is similar to SB 12 in the sense that it's basically here's your package. If you can build to this, then you get to tier 5. We're kind of working our way down on this package-based compliance path. So you can expect tiers 3, 4, and 2 to be in the 2030 building code. And then there's also an introduction for requirements on alterations to existing buildings. And so I can, that's almost a whole separate webinar for AEB, but basically requirements are triggered when you pull a building permit with the intention of improving the energy efficiency. So maybe we can move on to the next slide. Now, I do want to shamelessly plug the EnerGuide rating system, as this is kind of our bread and butter here at Housing Codes and Certification, and we really um, are investing a lot of time and effort into trying to make this appropriate for supporting the implementation of the energy performance tiers. Now, at a very high level, the EnerGuide rating system is a national system designed to rate the energy performance of new and existing homes. It's based on a technical standard and procedures, which are then used by registered energy advisors to create an energy model based on data they've collected on site. It includes a blower door test and a bunch of other kind of data collection pieces. It serves as the foundation for voluntary programs, including Energy Star for new homes and CHBA's Net Zero program. And it includes a bunch of resources, again, intended to support the implementation of the 2020 MBC. And so we've got the HOT 2000 energy modeling software. We have the 2020 EnerGuide rule set, which basically will create your reference house for you, aligned with code requirements. It'll spit out all of the relevant metrics to basically try to understand the level of energy performance in the code language. We have an energy code reporting tool, which is intended to kind of facilitate the communication of the outputs of the energy model between the energy advisor and authorities having jurisdiction, because we realize that sometimes they're using the full house report, sometimes they're using screenshots, sometimes they're taking their word for it. And so we're trying to develop tools to really improve the transparency there. And for authorities having jurisdiction looking to become kind of EnerGuide partners, we have data sharing agreements, which can be really interesting if you want to basically receive the EnerGuide data for evaluations done in your jurisdiction, and we can help you with analysis and all of that fun stuff. And so next slide, please, Patrick. The one thing I do want to stress is that the EnerGuide rating system does have quality control and quality assurance processes in place. However, we can only do that if all of the procedures are followed. And so the first bullet there says that we can streamline your energy code enforcement efforts as long as practitioners are following the rules. And now, as somebody who's requesting that practitioners use the EnerGuide rating system, there are things that you can request basically to ensure that they're following the rules. Now, the three-step protocol when it comes to quality control is, first of all, there's the NRCan registered energy advisor who submits the file and supporting documentation to the service organization within 14 days of the on-site evaluation. Now, the service organization is then expected to review the file and ensure that it meets the quality standard before submitting the file to the NRCan file submission portal within 30 days of the evaluation. And now, upon acceptance by the file submission portal, the file enters our database, and then we're able to query that database and do all sorts of kind of analysis. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the file needs to be submitted to EnerCan if you want it to be valid, because you could, in theory, do an evaluation of a home and then not send the file to EnerCan, but then you're not benefiting from that QA and you really have no idea if the procedures were followed. So thanks for that. I'm going to pass it over to Patrick now to talk about some of the LEAP activities.
All right, just had to find the unmute button there. Thanks, Alex. So I'm now going to shamelessly plug the LEAP program. I didn't think Alex's plug was very shameful, but mine might be a little more so. I'm with the Local Energy Efficiency Partnerships program here at EnerCan. We're a small team. We are located within a lab in Ottawa, where there are a number of researchers doing R&D on a variety of different topics. So envelopes, mechanicals, renewable energy systems, building energy simulation. And our role as a group is really to take a lot of the research and the knowledge that's generated here at the lab and put it in a format that industry can access it and use it to their advantage. So as a team, we're industry responsive. We work closely with the construction industry to understand what their needs are. And then as we create products or resources, those needs are always front and center. We work closely with a range of partners to build capacity. So groups like municipalities, provincial agencies, energy utilities, home building associations, and manufacturers. So work with the whole ecosystem of housing to try and drive that change. And supply chain is on this slide. We work closely with manufacturers to try and tailor solutions to meet the needs of regional markets as they look to move housing towards higher performance within the context of programs or codes. The other sort of big thing that we do is hold events. So over the course of our history, we've held over 300 events and had roughly 10,000 or over 10,000 attendees at those events. And really the idea is to try and allow industry to understand the options and decide which ones work best for them. We work in both new housing and retrofit. And then the other sort of function that we serve within EnerCan is to gather some of those insights from the market to support folks like Alex as he looks at programs and policy in the housing space within EnerCan and other parts of government. So that's kind of who LEEP is and some of the things that we do. In terms of how we do it, we have a fairly simple model. It's four steps: listen, build, deliver, trial. So the first step is always trying to understand the needs of stakeholders. And typically, our key stakeholder is the home builder. They're the ones who are on the ground, home builder or renovator. They're the ones who are on the ground who need to implement whatever program or code requirement is in place. And so trying to understand their needs is really the first step. The second step is to build the tools and resources that are going to help them get towards that stretch goal that they do have. And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and the kinds of products that we have developed. And then the third part is delivering. So it could be workshops, it could be events that we call technology forums, it could be training that are always based on 1 and 2. So this is not a push program. This is really a pull program. We're trying to understand the need, and then we're delivering things that meet that need. And then the final step within the process is trialing. So trialing where we do a lot of pilots at LEEP. So we're trialing innovation processes. We're trying these tools out with industry, depending on the topic or the knowledge product delivery. So we create a fair bit of guidance documents on different topics. We have apps and tools, and then the other part of this is field trials. So depending on the context, we'll look to work with regional partners to support trials towards higher performance housing. So listen, so a lot of what we do in terms of this stage of the work is with small focus groups. Typically, we'll bring a dozen or so builders, as well as people from the municipality, the energy utility together to try and understand what are the barriers, what are the gaps, and what are some of the opportunities as we look at some of those stretch goals whether it be a green development standard, whether it be the BC Energy Step Code. We did a fair bit of work in BC, and really trying to get that baseline so that um, we can suggest materials and knowledge products that are going to help people along the way. In terms of building, there's a range of different tools and products that we put together. Those range from actual interactive tool kits. So we recently have launched an air source heat pump sizing and selection app, which is gaining traction in the market and is being used in various programs across the country. Um, Other things might be guidance documents. So we have a whole series of high performance wall assembly guides that are posted on our website. We've developed an embodied carbon calculator tool that jurisdictions can use as they're looking towards those types of things, jurisdictions and builders. And we also work closely with the supply chain. So we challenge the supply chain to put their solutions forward in such a way that they meet the needs of the industry. So a lot of that is, working with them to tailor their product offering around a particular archetypal home, for example. Um, so those are just a few examples of some of the things that we build. But happy to jump into any one of those if people are interested in the questions. Delivery. So like I said, it's these are larger events. We'll typically bring the broader market in. We bring all of the actors within the ecosystem to the table. So we typically have building science experts. We would have manufacturers. We would have um, energy utilities who have programs that are within the market, and clearly the builder and contractor audience. To learn the same thing, all hear the same message all at the same time, and then move forward with common knowledge. So that's kind of the idea behind these. And we've run these coast to coast in different markets. There's folks on the line from across Canada. I'm sure a few of you have been part of these types of events. And then trial. So where the conditions are appropriate and where there's an interest, we tend to work with our partners in different jurisdictions to support builders in taking some of those innovations and putting them into play. And so in BC, for example, we worked with BC Hydro, Fortis, and Housing, and we came out of BC with roughly 50 field trials at different levels of the BC Energy Step Code. Recently, we've been working on some retrofit trials there as well. So sort of depends on the context and where people are looking to get to, but this is definitely where a lot of the learning happens within the context of LEEP. In terms of our core activities, we do work in new housing and retrofit. Stronger position in Part 9, so low rise. But we do have a small team that is starting to work in new MERBs in Part 3. And then this just gives you sort of a snapshot of the kinds of issues that we have been digging into as industry looks to tackle some of these challenges. In terms of, I'll just give you a brief example. So in 2017, we were brought in to BC, working with BC Housing, Fortis, and Hydro to support the early development of the BC Energy Step Code. So in BC, we delivered over 30 workshops, technology forums. We've got another product that we call an innovation exchange, which is where builders have tried a bunch of technologies. We bring them back to talk about that experience of building homes to the higher steps of the BC Energy Step Code. And talk about some of the challenges that they did have. And so we were quite involved in delivering a number of technical sessions in BC and developing materials that address some of those technical gaps and challenges that the industry had. So we worked with a number of manufacturers. We had lots of industry experts that we pulled in. We delivered from the lower mainland onto the island into the north, central interior of BC. And like I said, we had about 50 field trial homes that came out of it, which hit the various levels of the BC Energy Step Code. And a lot of these homes were the first time that the industry had sort of tackled these things. And so there was a lot of lessons learned along the way that I think helped pave the way for where BC is at right now in terms of their adoption of the BC Energy Step Code. Um, and so, yeah, we're seeking to work now more broadly across the country as we've now got the step code or the tiered code nationally, and as provinces are looking at adopting the step code, we're really looking to bring um, that methodology and the some of the materials and ways of working with industry out and into the broader market. Um, and so that's sort of part of this conversation that we're having today. So in terms of the work with ICLEI, so as Sue mentioned, we are working with the 14 partner municipalities. We've got 4 cohorts, and we're really going to put focus on GDS, and then within that, boosting the capacity of industry as they look to achieve different levels of energy performance underneath those. Um, We've had some initial discussions with those cohorts, and some of the things that we'll be digging into will be around cost of achieving those particular levels of energy performance, and then getting into some of the nuts and bolts of the kinds of technologies that are going to be required, so whether that be heat pumps and mechanical systems, envelope systems, as well as the process for how do we do a high performance house in such a way that we don't run into challenges going forward. So that'll be sort of the focus. And then for each of those regional groups, we're going to be developing some case study homes that we can use to benchmark the performance, and then look at with the industry and with all of the different partners, look at what kind of technology, what kind of applications are we looking at as we move towards those stretch goals that municipalities and provinces are ultimately going to be moving towards. And so this is the last slide. I think we're supposed to go for about a half an hour, and I think we're in that zone. I guess my big message from a LEEP perspective is that code adoption, really, it's important to ensure that the industry is ready. And so working closely with the leadership on the ground in a jurisdiction is very important, and making sure that they're comfortable and confident in their ability to be able to cost effectively deliver homes to a higher energy performance level. I'll go through these, Alex, and you can kind of jump in if you want to add anything. But the tiers of the code are really there to provide a predictable sort of pathway for uh, the jurisdictions as well as the industry. So the idea is to let industry know where we're going ahead of time, so that they can then work towards ensuring that they have the internal capacity and the knowledge and the know-how to be able to put it in place. And they're really looking for certainty across jurisdictions. So one of the things that as we were working in BC was a challenge, and one of the reasons they brought the step code in was because um, a lot of jurisdictions were setting different goalposts in terms of energy performance. And so if you were a builder, you might have to do, in one jurisdiction it was built green, uh, silver, and then in the other jurisdiction they wanted, 30% better than the code. And so it really was confusing and hard for builders to navigate. And so, the idea behind the BC Energy Step Code at least was to try and provide that pathway and some clarity and consistency with regards to the requirements. And so now everybody's sort of adopting it at a common pace and common step within the code. And so that would be, as we look at other jurisdictions, I think it's great to have something that provides that kind of certainty. ERS, so the EnerGuide rating system. can help support implementation of energy performance tiers. So we do have a framework, and there's a quality assurance piece around it, which I think is super important and could be useful to jurisdictions as they look at implementing. And then from my perspective, I think working with the boots on the ground or the industry, the home builders, and really trying to drive into cost-effective ways to achieve the tiers of the code is really important. Um, and it's really the only way that I think we're going to have adoption is if, I think we have to work from both sides of it, but I do think, ensuring that we have industry buy-in is pretty critical. And then we're already working with ICLEI, and we're really looking forward to getting into that project and supporting those municipalities that are part of this towards net zero project. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to you both. That was such a clear and informative presentation. I'm glad we have it recorded too, because I'm looking forward to going back and listening again. I'm sure I'll get more from it next time.
And if people have any questions or follow on, happy to take an email or answer them here today on the call.
Awesome. Okay. So we can dive into some questions now. I know we have a bunch that came into the chat. I did just want to start off with one before we dive into those. I know we've got a lot of municipalities on the call. I'm just wondering if a municipality wants to move faster than their province on building energy performance, and maybe they don't have a lot of internal capacity as well. What are some practical ways that they might think about using the tiered code to make some practical steps in that direction, especially in the context of jurisdictional limited authority too, as I know something that a lot of municipalities are wrestling with right now.
Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the things that we've heard about are these kind of voluntary incentives, accelerated permitting, for example, or if you follow a certain compliance path, then you get to the top of the pile when you submit your application. And so those are some of the things that perhaps can be an incentive for builders who I think permitting is takes time and oftentimes or always time is money. And so I guess by requiring a certain level of performance and requiring that builders follow a certain compliance path, for example, or hit a certain energy performance target, there's an opportunity there to provide some sort of non-financial incentive to accelerate the permitting process. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that, for example, if you require tier two and you say builders who are demonstrating compliance to tier two, they get it fast tracked for their permitting process or something along those lines. If they're following EnerGuide, you can have a little bit more certainty that the energy modeling was perhaps done according to our procedures. And so that can kind of help, I guess, perhaps accelerate the permitting process. I'm not a building official, so I don't know that for sure. And of course, there's the on-site inspection. But with respect to the energy model, those are some of the things that could perhaps be used to support those efforts.
Oh, great, thank you. And we can move on to some of the questions that came into the chat. So first, there's a question about step one of just what's the base code iteration that we're improving upon? Is it 2015, 2020, and does it vary by province?
So in the model code, it doesn't vary by province because provinces can adopt and adapt. But based on the framework of the model code, it is the 2020 that serves as a baseline.
And also wondering, is PHPP acceptable within the energy or EnerGuide rating system? And I believe that's the passive house planning package.
Yeah, good question. It is not. Unfortunately, I mean, the EnerGuide rating system has its own procedures. The EnerGuide rating system in and of itself doesn't require you to hit a certain level of performance. It basically just spells out what you need to do in order to get an understanding of the performance of the house that you're evaluating. And so you could do an evaluation on a passive house and then get an EnerGuide rating, but the EnerGuide rating system is not, I guess, aligned with passive house requirements, so to speak.
We did have a question too, wondering if there's any kind of mega list that exists of built net zero facilities across Canada.
Mega list. Um, I mean, we're talking about part nine here, so low rise. I think the best sort of database would be through CHBA. They actually have a map on their CHB and home labeling program um, website that you can zoom in and sort of see all of the builders who are building to net zero, how many projects they've completed. I mean, beyond that, those would be also recorded in the EnerGuide database, but I don't believe that that's sort of packaged in such a way that people could just sort of access it at this point.
Correct. I mean, the one thing I will add is that if you are a municipality looking to understand, are people building net zero in my jurisdiction, you could reach out to us and we could develop a kind of a partnership agreement where we could share that sort of information with you.
And another question too of which energy improvement tier is zero carbon building associated with? Maybe if you could speak a little bit too about just kind of, what the implications of that are.
Sure. So I don't want to get semantic, but energy and carbon are different. The energy performance tiers are fuel agnostic, meaning that you can reach a certain level of performance with any kind of fuel. Now, there are rules with the reference house, and if you want to get into the weeds, you can kind of see how some are getting a credit, so to speak. But at the end of the day, you can reach any level of performance with any energy source. Just might be more challenging with oil, for example.
I'll just pile onto that a little bit. And I know in BC um, they've got a zero carbon um, like part of the BC Energy Step Code, and I believe it's almost at just about any tier any step of the code. I think step three is sort of the one that most people are using there, but it just means that in that jurisdiction you're using electric heating and hot water to drastically reduce the carbon emissions of the home. So that's kind of how they've defined it in BC. But the 2025 building code is going to have a whole different set of benchmarks around carbon. It's going to be like a letter grade, and it doesn't necessarily look at absolute numbers. It's more kind of a spectrum. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me, Patrick. BC's approach was quite elegant, if I must say. They have a performance compliance path and a prescriptive compliance path. And their prescriptive compliance path for the zero carbon step code basically spells out the energy source that you should use to get to different levels of performance. Now, the NBC went a different path, and it's got complicated tables that you can expect to see when the code gets published.
Yeah.
Right. We do have a bit of a tricky, more maybe legal question here, and I can take a stab at this as well too. But I just wondering if there's any partner municipalities in Ontario, and within the cohort, we do have several municipalities from Ontario, but they're wondering how the work with green development standards is evolving with Ontario government changes to Bill 17. Patrick and Alex, I don't if no, okay.
I'm pretty
Yeah.
far removed from what happens at the provincial level. I mean, our role um, in on our team is really to provide technical resources, technical and knowledge resources to be able to support industry as they look at that next tranche. The sort of policy questions around that are beyond my ability to speak to. Um, so if somebody else on the call has that answer, that would be great. I'd love to know.
Just to add, so at ICLEI Canada, we did publish earlier the year a report on jurisdictional authority across Canada, and it for a long time was very uncertain in the Ontario context of whether mandatory green development standards were allowed or just voluntary. And it seems the province, through recent changes, has made it seems there's a lot of challenges now regarding a mandatory approach. But that does bring Ontario more in line with other provinces in Canada, where most were limited to voluntary approaches prior to that. So that is a whole other conversation, I would say. So maybe a topic for a future community of practice. Um, but another question that popped up is how do the 2025 energy intensity tiers align with the current percentage better tiers?
Yeah, good question. So the tiers themselves don't change. It's basically the target is in a different language, so to speak. And so under the reference house approach, you've got a percentage improvement target. You've got to get 20, 40, 70% better. Under the energy use metrics approach, you basically have a budget and you discount that budget based on the tier that you're pursuing. And so I think at a very high level, without getting into the details, you could say that it's still 20, 40, 70% better. However, the devil really is in the details. And so I guess the long and short of it is that the targets necessarily don't necessarily change. It's just we're adding a new compliance path to achieve those same energy performance targets.
Oh, you're muted, Sue.
Thank you, Patrick. We do have another question of what proportion of retrofits trigger a development permit and would be covered by the existing building requirement.
That is a very good question. And unfortunately, at Enercan, we don't have that information. If anybody's got that information, please share it because this was one of the challenges in trying to come up with a code for alterations to existing buildings is that, in one jurisdiction, you may have to pull a permit to replace a window. In the next jurisdiction, you don't. And so I think one of the principles for these new requirements is that they should not create undue burden because if it's too onerous, then people are just going to do it underground and not pull a building permit. And so there's a bunch of I guess we can call them weasel words in those requirements to say like if it's just not practical for you to meet these requirements, then it's at the discretion of the authority whether or not they want to enforce it.
Mm.
Okay, and we're getting close to time where we'll switch over to Nathan. But we did have another question pop up of, do you know where's the 2024 OBC? So in relation to 2020 NBC Tier 1, Tier 2.
Yes. I mean, we've got it pegged at roughly tier two, 2.5, perhaps, depending on the compliance path that you choose. But again, it really depends on what you're building.
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. I don't know if you guys had any kind of final thoughts or anything before we switch over to Nathan.
Nothing
I
for me.
think
Don't hesitate
no,
to
not
send me an
Okay.
email.
yeah.
Okay.
For me too. I mean, I've always happy to have further conversation if people have. I know there was a few questions about some of the resources that we have on our website. I think you should have my. I did put my email address up, but Sue, feel free to circulate that. If people have additional questions, happy to jump on a call or answer them via email.
Awesome. Fantastic. And just a reminder, so we did record the session today and we'll be sending that out by email, I'd say by early next week. So you should have access to that. Thank you very much to you both for your support here today and also your all your work with the cohort too. It's been so great to have you involved. So we're going to switch over to Nathan, who's going to speak a bit about climate insight today before we wrap up.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Nathan, and I work with ICLEI Canada as a mitigation lead. And one of the major projects I work on is Climate Insight, which I'll be doing a quick demo for everyone today. So Climate Insight is a free platform for communities across the country, really from coast to coast to coast, for communities to see their housing and infrastructure needs and make climate planning a part of that. So it's really taking those kind of biggest problems of today, some of the housing and some inflation, and putting that into a frame that we're framing climate as a big part of that. And so that really includes three features. So the map is one of the three features, and that has an infrastructure layer. So here we're showing Red Deer, and the infrastructure layer is showing all the bridges in that area. That also shows the climate layer, as well as the socioeconomic layer as well. So lots of to get into there, but we're just not going to have time in this webinar. We also have the library. So we have many case studies, code standards and guidelines, tools and infrastructure options applicable to communities across the country. So there's a ton there, and I encourage you all to go check it out. But today we're really focusing on the solutions finder. So this is the third major part. And so this is where you answer a few questions about your community and get specific curated answers on the specific project you're working on in the area you're working on it. So I'll kind of jump over to that here. So I've already filled out the solutions finder and some of the options. So I was looking at sort of a smaller community, looking at doing some building retrofits, usually a little bit more minor, and focusing on energy efficiency. And so when we go through the solution finder, you kind of get a list of options relating to your project. And so here you can kind of see we're talking quite a bit about housing in today and building to net zero in general. And you can see there's the housing icon. So you can kind of scroll through and see which ones are related to housing. And so when you're filtering your results, we have a relevance level. So for the solutions that I filled out, HVAC upgrades and natural shading and vegetation had 100% relevance, but something like green buildings policy had a little bit less than 89% relevance. And so you kind of see something related to that search I did. HVAC seems very related, like kind of exactly what you think is a minor retrofit for energy efficiency on a building. But something that you might not think of right away that comes up here is the natural shading and vegetation. Also a really important part of, energy efficiency, climate mitigation, and making your buildings better. And so you see we have a ton of results. You kind of get through to ones that are a little bit less relevant in the blue category here. And let's take a look right now at, let's say you have an older building that you're looking at doing a project to improve the air tightness. So you can kind of see right away that this is an option that you can use in your community to improve the housing stock, whether that's in the community or whether that's on some of your municipal buildings as well. And so you can see this is related to climate mitigation and adaptation, and it's gray infrastructure. So you can kind of see a little bit of the description here. So you learn a bit more about how it's related to climate mitigation, adaptation, and then you can go down further and see a little bit more about how that works. Obviously, air tightness is pretty self-explanatory, but some more in-depth solutions will have a list of how it works to really explain that to people that are kind of new to this area. And then you might want to see some considerations. So you might want to see that this would be quite relevant in all types of settings, indigenous, northern, remote. And we have all sorts of options to kind of look at what this looks like in your community, including equity, diversity, and inclusion options as well. And then you might want to see like where is this implemented? Is it somewhere near me, or where can I kind of see an example of someone doing this in the field? So you might want to look at the Sydney in Nova Scotia, where they transformed this former military base into a net zero community. Or you might want to look at more of a mass timber building if you're doing that kind of thing. Or this is a senior center that was retrofit to improve the energy efficiency quite a lot in Hamilton, the bottom here. And to make it even more relevant to our discussion today, we have the code standards and guidelines linked right here on the bottom. This one is the National Energy Code. And so let's say we click on that, and we can now see that for a code standard and guideline pertaining to housing. You kind of scroll through, you can read the description. You might look more at the related content to this, and it goes straight to the National Building Code. So I know there's some questions in the chat on how to kind of read a little bit more. Climate Insight is the place to do that. And then furthermore, this is the results from a tools finder. So I know some people in the chat were asking a little bit more about how to find out a little bit more how to find some of the tools that can help you actually implement some of these projects. And so I already went through the questions for this. And so kind of scrolling through some of the tools here, lots of them are very relevant to the building code. And so one that I noticed at the bottom here is that what municipalities need to know about Canada's net zero emissions building codes to kind of, if you want to further expand your knowledge on this topic. And then going back up to the top, if we kind of just want to refilter And I just want to show a few more options. So this shows 68 results, kind of taking off some of the filters. I know lots of people were asking about some of the LEEP resources, and Alex and Patrick and their team there at LEEP have done a great job, and we've seen lots of their resources, and including some of them we have on Climate Insight. So like that air source heat pump sizing and selection app that someone was asking about, you can access that right here on Climate Insight. So it shows at the top that it's a tool related to housing, and it applies in pretty much every jurisdiction across Canada. And if you want to access that directly, scroll to the bottom, click on the link, and you can pull up that resource. And just jumping back to the end of the presentation here. So Climate Insight, we have a lot of different resources. We have 157 infrastructure options for housing. We have 70 housing-related code standards and guidelines, and 13 housing case studies and 39 housing tools. And so really, if you're planning on your community to address the joint climate and housing crises at the same time, Climate Insight is really the place to do that. And then jumping to the final slide, where you find Climate Insight, you can scan the QR code at the bottom left there, go to climateinsight.ca. Or if you've seen it before and you kind of want to give us some feedback, we're adding new content monthly and doing new releases every 6 months, the next one coming up in October. And we're always looking for user feedback. We want to make sure this is most relevant and great for communities across Canada, and we're constantly updating it to do that. Anyone have any questions for me? I think we only have a couple minutes left.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Nathan, for that. That was a really great overview and connection with the previous presentations as well. And I'm so proud of everybody for actually staying on time. We had a lot to get through, and we got through it in just the perfect amount of time. So if there are no questions, we can clue up for today. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Patrick and Alex, Nathan. Really happy to have had you here. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.